With the release of Resident Evil 4 Remake, mobile gamers are searching for a title similar to the console release on mobile. But what perhaps not many people know is that there are actually a lot of Resident Evil games available on smartphones. Including Resident Evil 4 Mobile, which I bet you already know. In total, there are about 18 games, including both 3D and 2D versions of some of them. Capcom has always provided tremendous support, releasing great exclusive games for cell phone with Java ME and Symbian. Although the company doesn't focus on mobile as much anymore, since you can even emulate RE4 via EtherSX2 or even the remake of 1 via Dolphin. Not many people talk about these mini classics that were released between 2001 and 2013. Now, let's check out all the Resident Evil games that have been released for mobile. Only the official ones. The first Resident Evil game was released exclusively for mobile phones in Japan on June 4, 2001. That's right, folks. 22 years ago, Capcom released its first Resident Evil game for mobile phones. The game was a text-based adventure with RPG elements. A few months later, Zombie Buster arrived. It was a simple game of shooting zombies, but it was surprising for having colorful graphics. You could play as Leon or Claire. A Java version was released in 2006, with improved visuals. Also in 2001, Zombie Shooter was released, which has nothing to do with shooting. It's a puzzle game where you eliminate zombies by matching them. At that time, Japanese mobile phones were practically out of this world. While in the West, they used versatile but limited Java ME technology. In Japan, they used embedded games or Brew, which roughly would be a kind of very rudimentary smartphone system, like Symbian. You see how advanced those guys were in 2001. So keep this information in mind. Japanese mobile phones between 2001 and 2007 were much more advanced for gaming than the rest of the world. The game changed with the release of the iPhone. Assault the Nightmare arrived in 2002 on NTT Docomo Japanese mobile phones, and only in 2004 did it reach the rest of the world. The global version, needless to say, arrived on the Java platform. At that time, color screen mobile phones had just arrived in the West, and a game like this on a mobile phone had at most 100 KB of data. The game is, therefore, very simple, a casual title of shooting zombies. Released in Japan in 2003, Resident Evil Confidential Report is the first game in the Resident Evil franchise to really capture that Resident Evil feel. It arrived exclusively for Java ME mobile phones, and was divided into 4 parts. The Western version would only arrive in 2006. The game takes place in Raccoon City, during the outbreak of Resident Evil 2. 2 previously unknown characters are playable. Tyler Hamilton, a rookie police officer in the city, and Naomi McClane, an FBI agent. With a story divided into 2 chapters for each character and poor gameplay, the game is only really interesting for Resident Evil series enthusiasts because the controls are quite bad. Just like Confidential Report, the mission was first released in Japan in 2003 and then in 2006 worldwide. But here we have a big surprise. The first version, in 2D, released in 2003, was a casual game in the style of Assault the Nightmare, and its 2006 global version followed the same pattern. But the surprise would come in 2007, when Capcom managed to squeeze the graphics of Resident Evil 3 from the PS1 and put them into a Java game. The combination of the clunky controls of classic Resident with the keyboards and joysticks of old cell phones worked perfectly. The missions, the 3D version, is an excellent game and still works very well today with many missions, around 100, with the possibility of changing clothes and multiple endings. In this game, we control Jill Valentine, in what seems to be an alternative version of Resident Evil 3. Old school gamers certainly played this a lot on the Sony Ericsson W200, W300, or Asha 300. But what the old school folks might not know is that in Japan, there are many sequels to the missions. direct sequel to the missions, but that looks more like a DLC. The stories was only released in Japan, and takes place inside the clock tower in Raccoon City. This time, the game brings not only Jill, but also Carlos, Nikolai, and Mikhail. A simple game with many time missions. Biohazard, the episodes. This is another small game that was released only in Japan. Taking advantage of the success of the missions, the game has few stages and a mini-story that takes place within RE3 and RE2. It's really a shame that the Operations was never released in the West. Just looking at the images, it looks like an amazing game. This one was a worthy sequel to the missions. The game had 100 levels, and the visuals were based on the Resident Evil 1 remake that was released for GameCube. In 2007, there was a big surprise for Java-enabled mobile phones. Developed by Capcom Interactive Canada, Genesis is a reimagining of the first Resident Evil game, but as a puzzle and adventure game. Despite being a 2D Java game and looking quite rudimentary, the game maintained that sense of mystery of facing Resident 1 for the first time. The game includes text material that many consider canon. The release of the movie animation, Resident Evil Degeneration, in 2008 generated many games for cell phones and smartphones. For example, the Java version of Resident Degeneration was subdivided into two other versions, one 2D and one 3D, depending on your phone. Degeneration would also get a version for iOS and n-gage 2.0. It's worth remembering that n-gage 2.0 is not a phone, it's a platform. The n-gage worked with Symbian S60v1, while the n-gage 2.0 worked with Symbian S60v3 on phones like N95, N81, etc. For many years, Android fans could only dream of replaying this classic, but now it's possible thanks to the Symbian emulator for Android, EK2L1. The story of the game takes place after the events of Resident Evil 4 and before 5. Leon and Claire meet again during a zombie outbreak at an airport. However, the outbreak is just a ploy for the game's villain to steal a sample of the G-Virus. The iPhone version got better graphics. The last Resident Evil game for Java, Uprising, was released in 2009 and featured Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, the coolest couple in franchise, in another adventure. The game had gameplay similar to Confidential Report, but this time with better controls, nicer sprites, and more action. And to be honest, it was a pretty cool game. This was a time when companies really thought about the mobile gaming community, even those who didn't have powerful phones. In 2009, there were already iPhones, Androids, and yet Capcom released this remake of Resident Evil 2 for Java phones. That's a lot of consideration. And now we come to the probably most well-known Resident Evil game on mobile, Resident Evil 4 Mobile, 2009. Originally released only for Japanese flip phones in 2009, Resident Evil 4 Mobile gained versions for iOS, Android, and even the failed Tectoy console, Zeebo. The game brought parts of the original Resident Evil 4 adventure divided into chapters. For years, it was one of the most desired mobile games, especially because of its compatibility with weak phones. Remember, guys, this game is only 100 megabytes and used to run on phones with 256 megabytes of RAM. Today, RE4 Mobile isn't as sought after. With the evolution of mobile processing power and emulators like EtherSX2 and Dolphin, people prefer to emulate the original game and play it fully on their phones. What's this, Resident Evil: The Doors? Yes, it seems like creativity had hit a low point after Resident Evil 4 Mobile, and Capcom thought we were back in 2001. This game is a very simple one of opening doors in the style of American Ninja Warrior. Seriously, I don't know where the guys' heads were at. But this was already a hint that things had gone off the rails. Capcom was really abandoning the mobile platform. Based on the 5th canonical game in the series, Mercenaries vs is not even close to being a good game, being considered mediocre by renowned sites such as Touch Arcade and Pocket Gamer. Despite the beautiful visuals, clearly inspired by 5 and Mercenaries, this game focuses solely on multiplayer and has a very poor gameplay. Most of the blame falls on the gameplay full of boring gaps, bad controls, and the absence of a story mode. Brew even tried to revive it in 2013, but the game's reception was so bad that no one ever heard of it again. Around 2011, it was fashionable for Japanese companies to lend their brands to Brew to create social games with gacha elements and in-app purchases. This type of game became popular in Europe and Japan, with over 1 million active players. Outbreak Survive was released at the same time as Mercenaries 3D for Nintendo 3DS. The contrast between the two games showed where Capcom wanted to put its real games and where the cash grabs would be, and unfortunately, we lost out on that one. The last Resident Evil game to be exclusively released on mobile phones was, as you might imagine, a gacha game.
What? What the fuck?
Minute to Biohazard Clan Master was an RPG/card game that featured Resident Evil characters with a cute anime-style twist. The game was available from 2012 until 2015, when it was shut down. To avoid the bad taste of gacha games, we'll leave you with some final tips on great games that you can emulate on your phone. Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 run smoothly on any basic smartphone these days. If you have an intermediate smartphone, you can even play Resident Evil 4 on Dolphin Emulator. For those with premium smartphones, you can even emulate Resident Evil 5 and 6 with some graphical glitches, but it's doable. And that's our video about Resident Evil mobile games. Did you know about these games? Have you played any of them? Let us know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching our video, and until next time.